Hello and welcome back to the semi-finals of the Victory Road Series 12 February Challenge in partnership with GG Tour. I am Jamie Boyt. I'm still here with Ben Kiriakou, and we are going to be featuring two very strong American players here. We just saw Ugarte Subramanian make it into the semi-final. We are going to be featuring them once again, and they are going to be going up against Joseph Ugarte.
Yeah, two powerhouses of the US player base here. Joseph, no stranger to both top cuts and able to get into really deep stages of tournaments fairly regularly. Does a lot of work with the community as well, as does Aditya. We just featured Aditya as well on the previous match, so if you missed that, the match was a quite clean 2-0 in their favour, and they were able to take a really commanding path into the semi-finals, now to face up against Joe, who as I say, is one of the more consistent players certainly that we have in the game today.
Yeah, definitely. And they're going to be bringing a very consistent duo again in that Zacian and Kyogre are going to be facing up against Aditya's opposing Zacian and Palkia. So it's always an interesting matchup when we see those two restricted pairs face up against each other. We've got the Zacian, Incineroar, Palkia, Amoonguss, and Thundurus, and the Ditto coming out for Aditya's side of the field, which we are going to be seeing it from, against Joe's Kyogre, Zacian, Incineroar, Zapdos, Grimmsnarl, and Rillaboom.
Yeah, and we've seen previous games that Palkia does do a lot of work, but we did see in the first match in the top 16, Victor Medina piloting a Zacian Kyogre and managing to move their way through the Palkia matchup. No Raichu this time, just a Zapdos on Joe's team, so we'll be able to maybe use that Thundurus a little bit more effectively than we saw in previous rounds, and that's going to make a big impact in this matchup, forcing the Kyogre and the Zapdos to do a little bit less damage while being able to launch off some really powerful moves of their own. And we are going to get straight into turn one of this semi-final match, the first of two that we're going to be showing today. So let's see how these trainers have led into this match.
Yeah, we'll have to see what both the players are going to be going for. It's going to be the Zapdos and the Zacian coming out for Joe's side of the field. So going to be a very, very offensive lead coming out for Joe, and it's going to be paired up with it's going to be Zacian and Electric Flying type for both players here. It's going to be the Thundurus coming out for Aditya's side of the field.
It is, and yeah, there's one parallel that these two players have. A Zacian plus a electric flying type seems to be a combination that everybody can get behind, and certainly one that can make it to this stage of the tournament. We'll have to see. The Thundurus does have the advantage over the Zapdos in the fact that it has that prankster ability, is going to be able to launch out those support moves first, and we'll have to see if the Zapdos is carrying a little bit more of a defensive set with maybe a combination of Eerie Impulse and some other supportive moves, or if it's going for the more aggressive Dynamax and Max Airstream with a little bit of coverage to try and do as much damage as possible. And that distinction will make a lot of impact in this early game as we see how these players react to the leads.
It's just going to be a Protect coming out for Aditya's side of the field, as well as a Thunder Wave into the opposing Zacian. No Dynamax coming out from either player here, so the Zapdos just going on the offensive with the Heat Wave instead of just going for that Dynamax, maybe expecting an Eerie Impulse to come out. You don't want to be going for the Dynamax as you get Eerie Impulsed, and your damage would be reduced for the entirety of the Dynamax, but you can see why players are running Thunder Wave here. The Zacian on Joe's side of the field is getting fully paralyzed.
It is, yeah, not able to move at all this turn. And now Aditya's Zacian is going to be moving before Zacian on Joe's side of the field, and that means two things. The first of which is that a Behemoth Blade and a Thunderbolt probably would be enough to knock out Joe's Zacian if Aditya decides to go for it, but also that Zapdos is definitely under risk of something like a Play Rough coming out from Aditya's Zacian, and won't be able to do too much to avoid that, aside from trying to max and maybe go for the big Max Flare coming out off of that Heat Wave that we've just seen.
And the Zacian on Joe's side of the field is switching out into that Incineroar. That would have been a very nice switch in for the Thunder Wave, as it would have been immune to that because of the Prankster not affecting the Dark types, and getting the Intimidate onto the opposing Zacian as well. But Zapdos is going to be protecting itself here from that Eerie Impulse that was fired off into the Zapdos, and it looks like the Play Rough was going to be fired off into that Zapdos as well. So a very good pivot out for that Incineroar. Get that Fake Out pressure down onto the field. If now Joe wants to go for the Fake Out into the Thundurus, they can go for the Dynamax on the Zapdos without the fear of the Eerie Impulse. course, for that turn.
It's certainly, and that's one of the advantages and disadvantages, of playing a Zacian in the team. For one, it's a very good Pokemon. It boosts its offensive ability so much and can hit so much of the field. And Behemoth Blade, in a format where Dynamax is allowed, is really, really strong. Unfortunately for it, it can't Dynamax, and therefore is a little bit weaker than most Pokemon are in the format to a Fake Out, which that Incineroar brings onto the field.
And speaking of the Dynamax, the Zapdos is going for it here. Didn't get Irium Pulsed in the last 2 turns of the match, just sat on the field, and now is able to go for that Dynamax. You've got the Fake Out pressure from this Incineroar that is going to be fired off into that opposing Thundurus. Now would probably be in range of a Max Lightning that could be coming out from the opposing Zapdos. Sacred Sword is fired off into the Incineroar, though, going to do a very nice chunk of damage, but because of that Intimidate, able to survive that pretty comfortably. And the Max Lightning is going to be followed up by that Zapdos into the opposing Thundurus. That is able to pick up the KO, and that has put a stop to any Irium Pulses that could come out onto that Zapdos. Now it can make full use of its Dynamax.
Certainly can, and yeah, that's a really nice play there from Joe, just removing the ability for the Thundurus to be able to get those Irium Pulses onto the field means that Zapdos can be a little bit less hampered going into the following turns. Of course, once you've already decided that your Zacian is probably going to protect on your opponent's side of the field, it can be nice to really take advantage of that. But Aditya, not falling for it, is able to get quite a bit of damage off onto the Incineroar, and that damage will definitely rack up with Incineroar wanting to switch in and out and recycle those Intimidates and Fake Out pressure. Amoonguss, though, coming onto the field for Aditya and putting on a pressure all its own.
And now you can just go for the Sacred Sword into the Incineroar. There was no Airstream the previous turn. It needs to be the Lightning to KO the Thundurus. That means the Zacian on Aditya's side of the field is still going to outspeed. If you go for the Sacred Sword and that's the Incineroar, you can just very safely go for the Spore into the Zapdos. As we know, it's got the Cobra Berry. It'll be able to survive the Airstream. It'll probably be able to survive a Flare coming out from the Zapdos as well. So that'll be a very, very free Spore into that slot as the Sacred Sword is fired off into that Incineroar. No switches out from the Incineroar, just being able to be KO'd by that Sacred Sword. Max Flare is going to be fired off by the opposing Zapdos. It is going to be hitting into that Zacian though, but not enough to pick up the KO. It's going to do a huge amount of damage to the Zacian, but not quite enough. And now that Amoonguss is still just sitting on that field, completely ignored and able to go for a Spore. Even though the Electric Terrain is on the field, it was set by that Zapdos. It is still off the field and flying, so it is able to be put to sleep by that Spore.
Yeah, and now a really strong position here for Aditya not being able to, or being able to, sorry, go for really whatever moves he likes onto the Zapdos while it's on the field. And yeah, it's definitely not going to be moving the next turn, which gives the Amoonguss a little bit of room to breathe. But we have seen on this particular team, the Amoonguss doesn't have any moves like Pollen Puff. It does opt for the Giga Drain, so there's no kind of healing that the Zacian can do in this turn. The only healing that's going to be coming out is from that grassy terrain, and that's going to be probably putting the Zacian in range of something like a Grassy Glide coming out from the Rillaboom. So Joe definitely is pivoting well, but it will be the Palkia coming in and putting on pressure of its own onto the field this turn.
And the Rillaboom was probably going to be able to pick up the knockout on that Zacian with the Grassy Glide, but instead going to be Grassy Gliding the Amoonguss that did switch out into that Palkia. So that's a huge amount of damage onto the Pokemon that Aditya would be wanting to go for, the Dynamax here. So very nice call coming out from Joe's side of the field, getting some very nice damage onto the Palkia. Was definitely looking for that free switch in to be able to just start going for the Dynamax. It still very much can, but that was some very good damage into the Palkia.
It was, and you know, with the Grassy Terrain on the field and that Grassy Glide going as a priority move, Zacian possibly is in range, but possibly isn't. And of course, there's always that Amoonguss in the back, so you've got to be confident as to where you're launching that Grassy Glide into. We know that the Rillaboom is carrying the Assault Vest, so we'll be able to survive most moves that Palkia can throw down in its direction. So, you know, it's okay going for, I think, for a Grassy Glide this turn into the Zacian and just maybe being able to knock it out. And if you don't, you're probably not too worried about the effect of that. But Palkia now going into its Dynamax form, wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of Max Whirlwind coming out onto that Zapdos.
Yeah, probably should be in range of that Max Whirlwind. The Grassy Glide is fired off once again into the opposing Palkia. A critical hit means it's going to be doing some very nice damage, but Zapdos is able to outspeed the opposing Palkia there. Wake up and knock out the Palkia with that Thunderbolt. It would have been very close if that Grassy Glide had not got the critical hit, if that would have been able to pick up the knockout on that Palkia. But that's a very, very good turn coming out here for Joe.
It is, and now the Amoonguss is on the field, it can always redirect moves away. The Zacian does get another turn to protect, does get another turn to stall out before it has to worry about taking a Grassy Glide. And based on the damage it did to Palkia, I think Zacian probably would be able to survive it at this stage. Joe does have one Pokemon left in the back after the Incineroar went down. You kind of think it's probably going to be the Kyogre, and likely that Joe wants to protect it as long as possible.
Yeah, and the Heat Wave just going to be fired off by the Zapdos here, as the Zacian is going to be protecting itself. So Heat Wave is going to be doing some very nice damage to the Amoonguss. I say nice damage, that is a huge chunk of damage. And then the follow-up high horsepower into the Amoonguss as well from the Rillaboom is able to pick up the knockout on that Amoonguss. That's very impressive damage coming out from both of the Rillaboom and the Zapdos there. But yeah, the Zacian probably out of range of Grassy Glide at this point, but high horsepower as the move of choice for the Rillaboom should put it in range of that attack. And the Zapdos and the Rillaboom are going to be taking this game here for Joe.
Yeah, exactly. There's not really anything that you can do. You can try to knock out the Zapdos this turn, or you can try to knock out the Rillaboom. Either one, especially if you go into that Zapdos and you activate the static ability, will leave you in a poor position versus the probable Kyogre in the back for Joe. We see the avoid there. That's one benefit of playing up against something like high horsepower, and you've definitely got to play for your outs if you're a Deacher. And here's a Zacian coming out for Joe's side of the field, being the last Pokemon here, is paralyzed. So yeah, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, to be fair, high horsepower is not guaranteed to hit, so it did miss once. If it misses again and the Zacian gets fully paralyzed a few times, that could be a way back into the match for Aditya. He's going for the Behemoth Blade here, so most likely not able to pick up the knockout on the opposing Rillaboom. Most Rillabooms are able to survive that attack, as we can see here. Joe's Rillaboom does survive, and this time is going to be able to connect with the high horsepower, which will pick up the knockout on that Zacian. So it's starting to get a little bit scary there, the first high horsepower miss, but it needed quite a few high horsepower misses and full paralysis for Joe to lose that one. But high horsepower going to be able to connect this for this second time and take the first game for Joe.
Yeah, I really like the inclusion of high horsepower. A lot of the Rillabooms that we see on these sort of teams, or general teams in Series 12, should I say, don't carry it, tend to carry two grass moves. And I've seen some of them sneak in protect occasionally just to throw people off. But yeah, that high horsepower definitely showing why it deserved a spot on the team there, definitely. Very well played to both players. And it's going to be down to Game 2 to see what adjustments that Aditya can make to have a little bit of a better time Game 2.
Yeah, Aditya definitely had the pieces there, but there was some very strong plays coming out from Joe's side. The crucial turn was getting that Grassy Glide into the Palkia switch in. If Aditya wouldn't have switched into the Palkia that turn, that would have just been a Grassy Glide into an Amoonguss, which is doing pretty much nothing. So there was a missed opportunity from Aditya, but a very strong prediction coming out from Joe. So it definitely can go either way. It will just come down to those predictions that could be coming out from both players. The Thunderous was doing a pretty decent job for Aditya's side of the field, but didn't manage to get that Area Impulse onto the Zapdos, and that would have been crucial. If you get that Area Impulse onto the Zapdos at any point, that's the Pokemon that Joe wants to be going for the Dynamax with, especially because they're leaving the Kyogre on the bench, it seems. So the fact that the Thunderous wasn't able to do that made it a lot more comfortable for Joe, and you saw as well at the end when the Palkia went for its own Dynamax, it was already in range to be knocked out by that Grassy Glide and the Thunderbolt. Granted, it was a critical hit on the Grassy Glide, but it would have been pretty close even without that at that point. So if Aditya can make better use of their Dynamax or stop the Dynamax of Joe's a bit more, especially with that Area Impulse that come out from the Thunderous, that would be a lot more effective. We've also got that Ditto that is potentially waiting in the back if you do copy one of the opposing Pokemon. If you copy the Zapdos, that will match up well into the opposing Zapdos and pretty much the entirety of the team, to be honest. If you copy the Zapdos and Joe brings the same full Pokemon, you could just Dynamax your own Ditto, and that would still do well against the rest of the team.
Yeah, and give you those sort of, you have the opportunity to go more down the max airstream route rather than the max lightning, the max flare route that we saw Joe had to go down because he needed to get a KO on that Thunderous. He needed to do damage to the Amoonguss, and he needed to do the general work that he did in that match to get him to a good position. We are seeing a little bit of a switch up though. Aditya going for the Palkia in the lead combined with the Thunderous as well. A really dangerous lead there from Aditya, threatening the Thunder Wave and the Max Quake going into that Zacian turn 1. But of course, as we've seen before, these players are no stranger to making some different predictions.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be an interesting first turn. You've got the option to go for Aerion Pulse immediately into the Zapdos, and this time if you go for the Max Quake into that Zacian, even if the Incineroar switches in to be able to take that, then you'd still be getting some massive damage down onto it, probably even picking up the KO as well. But then you could potentially switch in the Rillaboom to be able to get the Fake Out, and that would be able to take it on a bit more comfortably. But at the same time, if you just stay in and try to play rough instead, expecting the Aerion Pulse into the Zapdos this time, you could just fall victim to the Thunder Wave and Max Quake immediately into that opposing Zacian as well. But the Zacian is going to be switching out here, and it is going to be into that Rillaboom, so that is going to be a very good switch in for any kind of Max Quakes that would be fired off into that slot. So if it was a Thunder Wave and a Max Quake, a very good switch in for the Rillaboom. Maybe the Zapdos is still just going for a Protect here to stall out the potential of the Aerion Pulse, so you can just go for Fake Out and Aerion Pulse next turn. But Aditya is hitting the gas straight away with that Dynamax, trying to make use of the Palkia's Dynamax this time, not wasting any time, going for it immediately so he can start firing off those max moves before it is just going to be immediately KO'd this time. And last time we saw that the Zapdos did outspeed the opposing Palkia, so maybe the Zapdos is not going to be going for the Dynamax here, and yeah, it's just going for the Protect.
It is, and I think that's a nice play, just making sure that you're not falling astray to the eerie impulses coming out from that Thunderous. But Thunderous did want to go for the Thunder Wave into that slot, followed up by the Max Quake, so a little bit of a wasted Protect there on the Zapdos. Could have got a little bit more value out of that turn, but under the circumstances, a very reasonable Protect to make, and a good switch coming out there from Joe, just mitigating all of the risk that he has. Of course, even paralyzed, that Rillaboom is going to be able to launch Grassy Glides, not before the Thunderous is able to launch out its Prankster moves, but certainly before the Palkia is able to act as well.
You can at least go for the Fake Out into the opposing Thunderous to put a stop to the Eerie Impulses that could be coming out. But now you got to risk that full paralysis chance. If you go for the Fake Out and Dynamax with the Zapdos, and you're trying to Fake Out the Thunderous to stop the Eerie Impulse, and you get fully paralyzed, that's going to be effectively the same as just not going for Fake Out at all. And the Dynamax is coming out for Joe's side of the field, almost certainly going to be that Zapdos. So you've got to hope that for Joe's side that an Eerie Impulse won't be able to be hit into that opposing Zapdos, because there was no switch outs here. The Thunderous did stay in. The Rillaboom's already paralyzed. The Zapdos can't be paralyzed, so you've got to expect that the Air Impulse would be trying to be fired off into that opposing Zapdos if it is put a stop to that by the Fake Out. But the Rillaboom is not going to be paralyzed here. It just goes for the Fake Out into that Thunderous, followed up by a Max Flare into the opposing Thunderous. So with the earlier special defense boost, that's going to be able to take it pretty comfortably here. It's going to get the sun going up, so if many Max Geysers were coming out from the opposing Palkia, that's not going to be doing as much damage, as we do see that come out from the opposing Palkia. Going for that into the Zapdos, it had the potential to go for a Whirlwind, but there was that potential Zacian switch in as well, so guys are covering that potential option. Still going to be able to do some massive damage and get that rain going again, but this time the Thunderous is able to stick around on the field. The Zapdos has gone for the Dynamax at this point, so now you can very safely get some Eerie Impulses into it.
You certainly can, and yeah, that's going to be a difficult position for Joe to be in, because you know the grassy glide will go after the Thunderous, won't be able to knock out the Thunderous, will be able to get some damage onto that Palkia, but you know, a little bit of damage on the Palkia is probably okay at this HP range. You're not going to be going toe to toe with the Zacian anytime soon when you're using a Palkia, so you want to be using the other Pokemon on your side of the field to be doing that. And with this Thunderous, probably going to be able to survive the turn with a combination of Eerie Impulse and whatever the Palkia throws out into the direction of Joe. Yeah, we probably see a decent turn here for Aditya, certainly with that Eerie Impulse coming out right at the start of the turn.
Yeah, getting an Area Impulse onto the Dynamax Pokemon is definitely decent and may allow this Thundurus to be able to survive this Max Lightning. It absolutely does. The Max Quake as well is still on that Thundurus. It's still got the special defense boost. And now it's overwritten the grassy terrain as well, so the Rillaboom won't be doing as much damage if it does go for those grass type attacks. But Palkia is able to fire off with a Max Quake, again boosting up the special defenses, but hitting into that Rillaboom, so maybe expecting a switch out into the from the Rillaboom into the Incineroar or the Zacian that could have been waiting in the back. Missed out an opportunity to go for the Max Whirlwind into that Rillaboom, but of course there could have been that Zacian switching in. But the Rillaboom is switching out here, just taking a little bit of time to do it as it goes for the U-turn. So it's able to take that Max Quake very comfortably, get that pivoting action. So the Pokemon that is switching in, whether that's the Incineroar or the Zacian, assuming the same two Pokemon were brought to this match, is going to be keeping it safe from that Max Quake. Now the Max is over for the Palkia. Zacian is able to switch in pretty freely here.
It is, and yeah, that's sort of causing some problems of its own for Aditya now, because the Thundurus would like to go for the Thunder Wave onto that Zacian, but can't really do it reliably, especially when Zacian can go for the Protect, especially now that the Palkia has lost its Max as well. The Protect is much stronger, and of course Thundurus would be susceptible for the Zapdos going for any one of its attacks into the Thundurus and knocking it out, and we know that that slot can't really go for any sort of defensive plays, and there's not many Pokemon that you want to ideally switch in, although you can with the Eerie Impulse drops. So Rillaboom coming in here for the Zacian now, resetting that grassy terrain onto the field and blocking that paralysis coming out from the Thundurus.
And the Max Flare is once again going to be fine. Not enough to pick up the knockout on that Thundurus, thanks to that rain being up and the two special defense boosts that the Thundurus had and the special attack drop that it got from the Area Impulse. Not enough, but it at least allows this Zapdos to be able to survive that Hydro Pump that did come out from the opposing Palkia, because in the sun it's not doing as much damage. If it was still in the rain, that would probably be able to pick up the knockout on the Zapdos. So pretty nice choice to go for the Max Flare to allow that Zapdos to survive, but that allowed the Thundurus to be able to survive the turn as well.
It did, and that's still okay. I think the Thundurus could be switching out here to preserve it and make sure the Thunder Wave tries to go off onto that Zacian in the later game. Palkia can switch up its moves now that it's probably going to be in Sun for the remainder of its time on the field, and now has to go for Earth Powers and for Max Whirlwinds, and of course Joe does have his immunities to both of those moves, which does create a few opportunities there for Joe to play defensively and switch about properly. You could go for the Hydro Pumps, but aside from the fact that they can miss, they're really not going to be doing too much damage to anything in the sun. And so yeah, unfortunately Rillaboom doesn't get to move this turn, doesn't get the Fake Out going.
Yeah, or potentially the Grassy Glide as well that could have been launched off into the Palkia. But Heat Wave is enough to pick up the KO on that Thundurus. It was at such low HP. But now Spatial Rend is able to be fired off from the Palkia into that opposing Zapdos. It's definitely going to be picking up the knockout. A critical hit on top for good measure is able to pick up the KO on that Zapdos.
Yeah, the high critical hit chance there, not really putting in any work at all. Nice to see the critical hit, always fun to do, but the Zapdos definitely would have gone down from that range for sure. Aditya now bringing in Zacian of his own Joe bringing in Zacian, and as is Aditya. Both going to be boosting their stats up. And now in a little bit of a tough position, I think, for Joe, but there is possibly that Incineroar in the back, which has been preserved till now. Incineroar is going to be boosted by the sun, able to launch out and Intimidate onto the Zacian on Joe's side of the field, and of course, more importantly, stop the Palkia from being able to knock it out with a Hydro Pump, and that does open a lot of doors for Joe to be able to bring that in much more safely and really navigate his way around this matchup.
Yeah, definitely do want to be pivoting around your fake out pressure that you do have, but Palkia is going to be the one pivoting out here. It's going to be switching out into the Ditto, so it is going to be copying the opposing Zacian. It has worked out that that is the side of the field that the Ditto is on. They're going to be copying the Zacian. It has already stolen that +1 boost that it got from the Intrepid Sword, and now its own Intrepid Sword is going to activate. So now you've got a +2 Zacian and a +1 Zacian on your side of the field. Grassy Glide is fired off into the opposing Zacian, the real Zacian that is, as well as the blade from Joe's Zacian following up into a Zacian. I can't tell which one that is. That is the real one, but it's able to survive. So it's able to fire off with its own Behemoth blade here. The Rillaboom has taken a very nice chunk of damage, so that probably is going to be in range of this Behemoth blade, and it is absolutely going to be able to pick up the KO there. So not quite enough from the Grassy Glide and the Behemoth blade. Very bulky Zacian coming out here, coming in clutch for Aditya, and now they still have both their Zacians on the field. Joe's forced to bring in their final Pokemon. It is going to be the Incineroar. At least you get to intimidate both of the opposing Zacians. Put one of them back to neutral and the other to +1. But that was a very crucial survival for Aditya there.
It really was, and yeah, now there's three Zacians on the field, and yeah, we're definitely at risk of losing track slightly. One of the things that's important this turn is that the Ditto, both players know, is a Choice Scarf variant and therefore locked into whatever move they go for. Behemoth Blade is able to probably knock out the Zacian, or at least come close. But even because of the fact that the Ditto doesn't change its HP to match his opponents, the Zacian on Aditya's side of the field, the Ditto on the Aditya's side of the field, probably will be susceptible to a Behemoth Blade from Joe's and not able to survive that turn.
But Palkia would be able to survive that Behemoth Blade, so that might be why it's switching in for that Ditto. And Zacian is just going to be keeping itself safe here, going for that Protect in case of any Fake Outs or Behemoth Blades. But Incineroar did just go on the offensive immediately as the Zacian went for the Behemoth Blade into the Zacian, and Flare Blitz was followed up into that Palkia slot. So a very good switch in for the Palkia there, not taking too much damage at all, and now putting Aditya in a pretty reasonable position here.
Yeah, now we were talking about it earlier that you can bring in, swap out the Zacian on Aditya's side of the field, bring in that Ditto, copy the Incineroar, and get your own drops onto the Zacian Incineroar on Joe's side of the field, and maybe that's a good thing. I mean, you sacrifice the ability for to have two Zacians on the field, but you do get a bit of fake out pressure, and I think that's going to be quite important going into this match. We did see on the screen there as well that the sun is going to be ending next turn, so there could be a little game plan where you bring in the Ditto, copies the Intimidate onto Incineroar and intimidates your opponent on Joe's side of the field. You get the fake out into the Zacian and you get a Hydro Pump onto the Incineroar, and then maybe you've got multiple things that are able to knock out Zacian on Joe's side of the field. We'll see if that's how the game plays out, but in the meantime, just a Protect coming out from this Palkia.
And a Sacred Sword hitting into that Incineroar, the Ditto that copied the Incineroar, but not able to pick up the knockup thanks to the Intimidate that it did put on the field. And like you said, the sun has faded here. This opens up the opportunity to go for that Choice Scarf fake out into the Zacian and then Hydro Pump into the Incineroar. If that connects, then that is going to be picking up a knockout, and Earth Power probably won't do it. So that could be a potential choice that Aditya wants to go for. Hydro Pump is incredibly risky with its very shaky accuracy, but that would put Aditya in a very commanding position if they do want to be going for that. A Choice Scarf Incineroar probably still isn't outspeeding the opposing Zacian, so that is probably what Aditya wants to go for. There is the fake out. This is most certainly going to be a Hydro Pump into the opposing Incineroar that does connect, so
yes,
it is going to pick up the knockout there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a lot of damage into the Incineroar. The Incineroar does, unfortunately for Joe, go back to its trainer there, and a little bit of Life Orb recoil coming out from that Palkia. And now it's a little bit different. You know that the Incineroar, or Ditto, should I say, on Aditya's side of the field is locked into Fake Out, and so yeah, you've got some decisions to make about how you play this turn, especially if you're Joe. You've got to be doing damage to the Palkia, but do you instead decide to knock out the Zacian coming in for Aditya this turn and try to lock it in front of a Life Orb Palkia. Clearly not, as the play rough goes into the Palkia, does pick up the knockout there.
Yeah, but unfortunately the sides are not in Joe's favor here. As the Ditto did switch out, it can switch straight back in front of that Zacian, so it is going to just be able to copy that, get that +2 attack once again, and should just be able to clean up the game at this point. It can just go for the Behemoth Blade. Even if that's not enough to pick up the knockout, a follow-up Behemoth Blade from the real Zacian would be able to pick up the KO. So Aditya has managed to position themselves into a winning position here, and we should be going into a game 3.
Yeah, even at +1 because of the earlier Intimidate, it definitely won't be enough to pick up the KO with Behemoth Blade coming out from that Ditto. We see it going in there. Ditto going for the Zacian and doing a lot of damage. I believe that's Joe's coming out second. We'll see.
So many Zacians.
There's Zacians everywhere. Zacians have conquered the field. No, it was Joe's indeed, but unfortunately, because of that choice scarf on Aditya's side of the field, the Zacian or Ditto will be able to knock out Joe's Zacian, and there will be no more. In fact, there will only be one Zacian on the field that's not actually a Zacian. So think of that what you will, but Zacian is definitely going to win the game either way.
You say definitely. Joe is going for their win condition of the quadruple protect to stall out the PP of the Behemoth Blade. That is a viable win condition, as we see a double.
Here we go.
I have literally never seen a quadruple protect in the game. I've seen many triple protects, but I've never seen quadruple, and that is what is necessary to stall out, because Ditto is guaranteed to have high PP. So here we go. There is a triple protect. I have never seen the quadruple. Are we going to see the quadruple coming out?
Jamie, if we see this right now, I haven't seen one either, and I've been playing the game for 10 years. This is
not today.
Not today. I mean, do you know what? I would have loved to see it. It would have been such a shame for Aditya, who played that game so well and positioned the end game as he needed to do to get himself back into the game. And a really good, I think, use of Ditto in this format, in this matchup, and positioning it exactly how he needed to would have been so good if we got that quadruple protect, but unfortunately not. I would have really liked to see if the struggle would have been able to knock out the Zacian.
Yeah, it would have been
whether the quadruple protect even mattered or not, but
yeah,
hey,
it's one attack. Yeah, that would have been really close. Yeah, like that was the win condition to go for, though, for sure. Like you've got to place your outs, and if a quadruple protect is your out, you've got to go for it. So yeah, respect to Joe for recognizing that and going for it. But getting triple at least got pretty close. So
yeah, absolutely.
And the Ditto was very crucial there, being able to copy the Zacian to be able to get those boosts, outspeed and get the Behemoth Blades, copy the Incineroar to get the fake out and the Intimidates that was able to allow it to survive that Sacred Sword as well. So yeah, it's very, very good showing the Ditto. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that come again to the match.
Definitely not. And yeah, I do think that the 4 Pokemon that Joe's bringing to the match are probably the correct ones. Certainly the Palkia, the Thunderous, and the Zacian have to come for Aditya. I think it's just that last Pokemon slot. And we could see maybe the Incineroar come out for Aditya in this game. I think that would be quite a good Pokemon to see. We see the Intimidate and Fake Out cycling combo of Pokemon that we've seen in previous series, being that Incineroar, Rillaboom on Joe's side of the field, and Incineroar has a good time into that. And because we haven't seen Joe bring his Kyogre yet in this match, you kind of think that the Incineroar may be a little bit safer to bring, but we'll see if Aditya's does feel the same as we go into round 3, and we'll decide who will be going into the finals in this match.
It's been a great set so far, so let's hope for another great Game 3 coming out for both players. Grimmsnarl is an adjustment that has been made coming out for Joe, paired up with that Zapdos into the face of the Thunderous and the Palkia once again.
Indeed, and this Grimmsnarl is quite an interesting adjustment because it does carry Spirit Break as its offensive option of choice, and no fake out coming out from it, so we'll be able to just sort of land some attacks straight away. But you do have to worry if you are the Palkia about that Spirit Break doing both super effective damage but also dropping the special attack as well as its secondary effect, and that will be quite significant because that Palkia did want to do a lot of damage. If Joe can get a special attack drop or two onto this Palkia, then you'd like to think that the Zacian would be in a great position to just launch out whatever attacks it wants. Even in the face of Zacian on Adich's side of the field, it would be definitely possible to do.
Yeah, it would, since it is going to be a Dynamax coming out for Joe's side of the field, so you've got to assume it is going to be that Zapdos. So very brave Dynamaxing in the face of an Eerie Impulse that could be coming out from the opposing Thundurus. There's no fake out to keep it safe this time, so if it does decide to go for the Eerie Impulse, that is going to really reduce the damage coming out from Joe's Dynamax. But it is going to be followed up by a Dynamax of Aditya's own here, going for the Palkia. Probably going to be going for some massive damage, as getting in before the potential Spirit Breaks that could be coming out from the Grimmsnarl. But of course there is the option to go for a Max Flare with the Zapdos like we saw previously, to be able to reduce the damage that could come out from the Max Geyser, and that is the best way of hitting the Grimmsnarl as well.
It is, and we'll have to see if the Grimmsnarl's light screen is enough to stop that damage and maybe allow the Zapdos to just go for some max lightnings, as we see there, doing a bit more damage. No Eerie Impulses coming out from the Thundurus on Aditya's side of the field, so looks like it's going on the offensive. We saw light screen already. We know that the Zapdos outspeeds the Thundurus, and so now it's a combination of two attacks from Palkia, one of those being Max Geyser going into that Grimmsnarl. Now light screen allowing it to survive the turn and not be knocked out this time, and allow it to go for some maybe Thunder Waves later down the line. Thunderbolt though coming up afterwards from the Thundurus, and again just not quite being able to knock out that Grimmsnarl and allow it to do some more shenanigans this turn.
Yeah, very nice light screen coming out from the Grimmsnarl, able to allow it to survive, getting some huge damage in the face of the potential Area Impulse that didn't come out. So a very nice call from Joe to get that massive damage down onto the opposing Thundurus. It would be in range of any attack the Zapdos would want to go for. If it goes for an Airstream, that could potentially allow the Grimmsnarl to outspeed the Palkia, depending on how both Pokemon are trained as well, and that would be able to put a stop to any damage that could be coming out from the Palkia as well. But speaking of damage reduction, there's an Area Impulse that is fired off into the opposing Zapdos, and a Thunder Wave misses the Palkia. A very crucial dodge there. The Max Lightning is going to follow up into that opposing Thundurus. Again, easily be able to pick up the KO on that Pokemon, but that Thunder Wave not hitting the Palkia means it is guaranteed to be going for this Max Wormwind this turn, that is fired off into the opposing Zapdos, and not making use of the Rain Boost in the face of a potential Max Flare, just going for the safer option, the guaranteed damage of the Max Wormwind, also reducing the damage output that could come out from the opposing Grimmsnarl as well. But that Thunder Wave dodge could be very crucial here.
Could be, and now Aditya bringing in his own Zacian, definitely going to be all eyes on that Grimmsnarl, stop it going for the Thunder Waves and stop it going for all of the damage that it wants to do. Zapdos at 2 minus stages of special attack isn't that difficult to deal with. You know, you can stand in front of it with Zacian and Palkia without too many troubles, but that Thunder Wave will have long-lasting impacts on the game, and yeah, really unfortunate there for Joe, because once you've got a Thunder Wave on that Palkia, aside from the fact that it may not be able to move, you do get the speed drop and allow it to be able to move next turn against the Zacian. But just a Reflect coming out here from the Grimmsnarl, using the last opportunity to reduce the damage coming out from Aditya's side of the field.
Yeah, and that means no Thunder Wave was fired off this time as well, so you're going to be able to reduce the damage coming out from the Zacian, but the speed control is taken care of now that the Max Quake is going to be able to pick up that last little bit of damage onto the opposing Grimmsnarl. The Zapdos kept itself safe from the Behemoth Blade with the Max Guard, but now you've got your screens up. The Dynamax has been used up for both players, but the screens could be very crucial for Joe, but the Thunder Wave is taken off the table at this point.
It is, and that's really important now that Aditya's Pokemon aren't going to be as fast as Aditya intended, at the very least, in this matchup. We know that the Zapdos is between the two restricted on Aditya's side of the field, and it's likely by what we've seen already that the Zacian on Aditya's side of the field is the slower of Aditya and Joe's. But there is always the potential of that Ditto in the back, and we've seen with that Choice Scarf it was able to close out the last game, so by no means over. Free Pokemon to free, the third Pokemon not being revealed for either trainer, and these guys have got to be able to figure out how they're going to navigate through the rest of the turn and what Pokemon they really want to target down.
It's going to be the Zapdos switching out here into the Incineroar switching in, so definitely going to be a good switch in against the opposing Zacian, get that Intimidate down. Keep your own Zacian safe, because now it's at neutral and behind a Reflect. It won't be taking as much damage from the Behemoth Blade that could be coming out. But Palkia is going to be keeping itself safe here from any of the play roughs that could be coming out, and that is what was fired off into that Palkia. And now that just leaves the Zacian on Aditya's side of the field free to go for its own play rough into the Incineroar, but you can see the Intimidate and the Reflect there means that this Incineroar is only taking about third damage.
It is, and yeah, it's a really rough position for Aditya to be in. It's trying to launch out attacks, doing it successfully, but the amount of power control that Joe has on his side of the field is really making an impact in this match. Palkia coming out here, revealing the third Pokemon for Aditya is going to be that Ditto again, and is going to be copying that Incineroar. Going to be getting off the Intimidate. We'll see in the rain whether it's something like a parting shot coming out, or whether they go for that Scarf Fake out again, which did win them the last match here, as Incineroar on Joe's side of the field is going to be switching back to that Zapdos.
Yeah, going to be preserving the Intimidate and the Fake Outs that are coming out. Play Rough was launched out into that Palkia slot once again, but it did hit into the Ditto that copied the Incineroar, and Behemoth Blade is able to be fired off by the Zacian on Aditya's side of the field into the opposing Zacian, but again, just still only doing about a third damage. The damage reduction coming out here is very crucial. It's just allowing that Zacian to be able to tank those hits very comfortably.
I mean, you're almost in a situation where Aditya's doing about half the amount of damage to Joe's able to do in return to Aditya, and yeah, regardless of the speed tiers of these Pokemon and who goes first, doing double the damage that you're taking is always a nice situation to be, and Joe's definitely in a good spot in that case. Of course, the Reflect and Light Screen aren't eternal. There is a Light Clay on the Grimmsnarl. They're going to last a total of 8 turns. Light Screen's been on the field for about 4 or 5 now, where Reflect has only been on the field for about 3 turns so far, and so there's still a long way to go where Aditya's going to have to worry about what damage he's able to do, and that Ditto, having taken a play rough previously, is not going to have too many chances to switch in.
It was at least able to get the Intimidate onto the Zacian, so it did do something as it switched in, but it's going to now be switching into the Palkia that did switch into a Play Rough, and that's not the Pokemon you want to be switching in for that. Play Rough is going to be fired off by Aditya's Zacian, and it is not able to pick up the Zapdos, and it gets the static, so that's going to still paralyze, even though there was no more Thunder Wave that could come out. Thunderbolt fired off into the Zacian, though. It's going to do some nice damage, and that should allow the Zapdos to be KO'd by its own Life Orb Recall here. So this gives an interesting position now that the Incineroar has to switch in for both sides of the field, because the Ditto is going to have to copy that Incineroar rather than the Zacian.
Yeah, and I was raring up to say before that Life Orb Recoil was able to knock out the Zapdos, that Zapdos isn't the Pokemon that you really want to be copying. If you're a Ditto, you do want to get that Intimidate off onto the field. It's probably the only way that you have an opportunity to survive all of the attacks coming out from Joe's side of the field if you're a Aditya. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame that you have to take Intimidate in return, but I think, at this point in the game, critical hits are the things that are the most likely to be able to win out the game here for Aditya, and Joe just has to hold his ground and make sure that he plays in ways such that he's able to launch his attacks at minimal risk, especially given that the Zacian on his side of the field is definitely faster with that paralysis.
Yeah, it's going to be an awkward choice for the Ditto Incineroar, because if you go for the fake out, that is your only attack for the rest of the game. At this point, you can go for the fake out for sure. Yours would be faster. You can go for fake out before the opposing Incineroar, but then do you go for that and lock yourself into that move for the rest of the game? It would allow the Zacian to potentially go for a Sacred Sword to try and knock out the opposing Zacian, but fake out here is going to be fired off by Joe's Incineroar, and Sacred Sword is going to be fired off by the Zacian into Aditya's. So no opportunity to go for fake out from Aditya's Ditto, so it's just going to be knocked out here at this point. And now Joe's in a very commanding position. They just get to go for the Behemoth Blade, get to go for the Flare Blitz, and that should clean up the game and advance Joe into the finals.
It should do, definitely, and Aditya knows that. Deciding to go for the forfeit, knowing where he is in game 3, and give the win to Joe. A much deserved win, of course. Played it really well, and I really liked that game 3 adjustment, bringing the screens into play. A very different way of approaching the matchup to game 2 and game 1, where it was more about positioning and trying to remove that Thunderous. Instead, in this game, while the Thunderous did get removed quite early on, relatively speaking, and with the Thunderous not doing as much work, those screens being persistent for the rest of the match with that Light Clay item extending them for a further 3 turns, they would have definitely been over without that item in play. So just a testament to how you can play these sort of teams a little bit differently, and how much work that Grimmsnarl did.
Yeah, definitely was a good adjustment for Joe going into this third game, and did advance him into the finals. So he's our first competitor that is going to be joining the finals. We'll cut to a very short break, and we'll find out who is going to be joining Joe in that final as we come back for our second semi.